A young girl is shoved to the ground in the middle of a grocery store aisle while shoppers look on. She wears a green hoodie and clutches a small blue backpack like a lifeline. Someone in a uniform calls her a liar and reaches into her bag with a blunt hand. She presses her palms to her chest and whispers, "I did not take anything." What starts as a family argument escalates into a public spectacle with badge and baton. A black woman in tactical gear arrives on the scene and changes the course of everything. Stay with this story to see how a single video and a small band of neighbors turned humiliation into accountability and policy change. What would you do if your child was thrown to the floor in public? Why did it take a bystander to say enough to make officials look again? The fluorescent lights buzzed above, carts squeaking, overhead music swallowed by the hum of voices, the clatter of a checkout scanner, and the metallic rasp of a security radio. On a humid Saturday morning, the store smelled of roasted coffee, and bleach sprayed at dawn. A child sobbed in the aisle, a sweater damp where she had fallen. A cashier looked away. An older woman covered her mouth and said quietly to her friend, "I cannot watch this." The camera of a customer's phone recorded the shove and the moment the girl hit linoleum. Small knees scraped, backpack straps twisted around her shoulders. In the space of 3 minutes, the family dispute had become an allegation of theft. And with that allegation came hands on wrists, a badge up close, a voice that did not ask, and a protocol that assumed guilt until proved otherwise. The rest of this piece will trace how a family fought back, how evidence was gathered, how institutions responded, and what changed afterward. She was 12 years old. Her name was kept private as she navigated the first hours of shock, but those near her called her June when they needed a name to soften the scene. June had been shopping with her stepfather to buy cereal and a small toy the family could afford. The object of the dispute was a bright plastic watch marked down and tucked into an end cap display. It was cheap and flimsy, but to June it was real and important. She had saved allowance coins in a jar at home, had taken a responsible afternoon to walk to the store, and had handed the money over at the register. What unfolded seconds later was a cascade of accusation that did not start at the transaction. At home, June lived in a crowded apartment with her mother, Keisha, and her stepfather, Marcus. Keisha worked double shifts at a hospital and arrived home tired but steady, with a voice that hummed like a lullaby when she tucked June into bed. Marcus balanced part-time construction with night classes and had a laugh that filled the kitchen when he made pancakes. The family had rituals. On Fridays, Marcus taught June how to tie shoelaces in a way he called the soldier knot. On Sundays, Keisha cooked collard greens and told stories about being the first in her family to finish high school. There was a small jar on a high shelf full of pennies and nickels. June had been saving for months for a small blue watch she had seen on a Saturday walk. She knew exactly where every coin came from. She remembered how she counted them at night, how she placed 3 coins on her bedside table as a charm before sleeping. Her teacher called her bright and considerate. Her neighbor Rosa praised her politeness, and her Aunt Carla sent postcards from every city she visited, telling June that patience pays off. The morning of the incident, June left with a list in her pocket and a promise from Marcus to pick her up at noon. She took the bus, felt the leather bench seat warm and sticky beneath her, watched sunlight split through dirty windows, and settled like sugar dust on the seat. The walk from the stop to the store smelled of frying oil and hot tar. Somewhere an ice cream truck jangled a melody, and stray dogs barked in a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. When she stepped into the store, she felt the cool air wash over her face, a relief from the summer heat. The smell of citrus cleaners was sharp and faintly medicinal. Her fingers brushed the cardboard display where the watch sat, cold metal against her palm, the tag fluttering like a small flag. She was careful, slow, remembering the exact amount in her jar. On the way to the register, a woman in a long coat named Tamara, who often shopped at that store, glanced over and frowned. Her reaction was small at first, a tightened jaw and an inward breath, but it would later become a central piece of how strangers made assumptions. A man named Eric, who worked the floor, watched with a neutral face and then called for a security associate using the store radio. The fluorescent bulbs hummed, carts pushed past with the squeal of worn wheels, and a child's laugh from the toy aisle seems to belong to another timeline. June felt two gazes follow her, one patient and distant, one sharp and accusing. Someone muttered that things had been disappearing lately. The surveillance cameras were fixed, black eyes in the corners, but no one in the aisles thought to stop and double-check the register tape. Instead, a security guard named Daniels appeared, his uniform fitted, his posture rigid. He asked for a receipt. June reached for her pocket and produced the crumpled paper that bore the cashier's stamp and time. It fluttered like a small proof in a gust of static. The first confrontation in the aisle has to be read scene by scene to feel the grinding. Tension. Dialogue opened short and clipped. June said, "I paid for it." Daniel said, "Where's your receipt?" June said, "I have it right here." Tamara said, "You need to show it to the manager." Daniel said, "Stay right here until manager gets here." June said, "My dad is coming to get me." Tamara said, "You cannot just walk off with things." Marcus arrived and spoke in low tones. Marcus said, "What is going on?" Daniel said, "We have a complaint that this girl took something." Marcus said, "She paid for it. Show me the register tape." Tamara said, "I saw her near the display." Marcus said, "Then show the footage now." Daniel said, "We will check when we can." In those dozen exchanges, the texture of the confrontation shifted. Each line carried unspoken judgments. The sound of the radio crackled like static in all their ears. There were gasps from shoppers and silence that felt heavy as wool. The sensory marks were many: a metallic hiss from a soda cooler, the smell of stale popcorn, the roughness of Marcus's sleeve as he gripped June's shoulder to steady her, the brightness of the display lights making the watch glint like a challenge, the damp of June's palm on the receipt, and the distant echo of a child's laughter from another aisle that made the scene feel crueler. As the manager approached, his stride was professional and tight. His name tag read Eric Martin, and his expression tried to be neutral. He asked to see the register tape and the camera feed. The store computer was slow, and the loading cursor flicked like a metronome. Eric called for a second security officer, and the murmur in the store grew louder. At some point, an older shopper, a retired teacher named Pastor Aaron Cole, who bought his weekly loaf at that time, stepped forward and said, "Maybe we should calm down and look at the receipt." That voice softened the edge for a moment, but did not change how authority chose to move. The first shove happened not with malice at first, but with a hurry to resolve a complaint. A push meant to remove a child from the way became a tumble. The grunt of impact, the scrape of denim on tile, the smell of dust and powder from the cleaning station when she hit the ground, the metallic taste of surprise rising in her throat, the sharp intake of breath by the crowd. 2 minutes of video show the push, and the moment a mother in the parking lot runs toward the entrance, seeing her child on the floor. Keisha's phone call to the store became the pivot that escalated the presence of official authority. She used a firm voice and named her daughter June. Security held on to June's wrist. An officer arrived in uniform, Officer Lee, and asked for identification and a statement. The officer had a measured tone that suggested routine. Marcus insisted on the register recording and demanded to see the watch in question. The officer took the word of the complainant over the family's demand for evidence. He handcuffed June briefly to restrain a perceived threat, and then let go when the manager confirmed the register rang the item. But the footage was grainy, and the customer complaint did not align with the timestamp on the ring. Still, June left with a scraped knee and a bruise on her wrist that would throb for days. The scene that followed was a slow burn. The family left the store in a cloud of shame and anger. Keisha's voice shook as she recounted the moment on the phone with her sister Carla, who advised them to document everything. Carla told her to save the receipt, to get witness names, to ask for the video file, to not let the moment just fade. At home, neighbors gathered. Rosa Alvarez, who lived across the hall and babysat June sometimes, inspected the scraped knee with a practiced calm and advised cool compresses and an antiseptic wipe. Pastor Aaron left his market basket with Marcus and said he will go to the city council together. The community reaction began to form around named faces, a patchwork of immediate helpers. Naomi Bennett, a local civil rights attorney who volunteered at the community clinic, texted Keisha offering to review any video and to help file a complaint with corporate. She said she would come by after lunch. The next hours were a careful choreography of evidence gathering. Keisha opened her phone and scrolled through the footage that shoppers had uploaded to social media. Tamara's camera had recorded the shove. Another customer named Daniel Perez had captured the moment from the other end of the aisle from his selfie perspective and included the timestamp. Marcus demanded the store hand over the raw footage. Eric Martin told them corporate policy required a formal request and 24 hours for management to review camera files. That delay is common, but it felt like obstruction. Naomi called the store and asked for the footage now. The store refused. Keisha filed a formal complaint online and asked for a copy of the internal incident report. At this early micro level, there were 6 clear sensory details to folder the scene: the buzzing lights, the smell of citrus cleaner, the push of a cart nearby, the slick of the tile under the girl's knees, the tinny ring of a cell phone camera, and the taste of shock in Keisha's mouth. Now is the point to ask the viewers a question and invite their stories. If this made you angry, tell us what you would do in the comments. Start yours with "I saw" and tell us the place and what happened. Your stories help build a map of similar incidents and can help others know they are not alone. If you have footage or if you witnessed something like this, say, "I saw," and give a short detail. People's accounts matter. After the invitation, the story takes a turn. The family's legal ally Naomi arrives and brings with her not only legal knowledge, but a network. She had represented families in similar disputes, and she carried an energy that felt like action. Naomi introduced herself to Marcus and Keisha in calm, direct tones and asked to see the raw footage. She explained the chain of custody and why it mattered. She demanded the store preserve the recording and told Eric Martin that she would be watching the internal incident log. Naomi also called a friend on the city police oversight board to flag the case. While Naomi worked the legal route, the community organized a small online petition asking for the store to release footage and to apologize. Pastor Aaron and Rosa organized a small vigil at the entrance of the store the following day. A local journalist named Carla Rodriguez reached out asking to interview the family. Each named person added a layer of pressure. The turning point came when a black woman in tactical-style clothing arrived at the scene on the second day. She stood tall, with the calm of someone who had seen many modes of authority and knew how to navigate them. Her name was Lieutenant Naomi Cooper. She wore a field vest and had a presence like a river that did not hurry but did not stop either. Lieutenant Cooper had previously served in military legal services and later worked in community training programs focused on de-escalation and youth protection. She was not there in an official capacity that day, but as an ally and a person who refused to watch another child be treated as suspect. Her approach to the case would change how officials engaged. The arrival of Lieutenant Cooper was not cinematic in the way movies draw attention. Her boots scuffed softly on the pavement, her voice was steady, and she moved through the crowd like someone who had practiced telling truth firmly and without flourish. She asked to see the footage and to speak with store management. She said, "I want to understand the details and see the timestamps." She demanded the preservation of evidence in a way that felt procedural and immediate. Her presence forced a review by corporate and a different kind of attention from the police oversight board. At first, the store resisted, citing policy and privacy concerns. Cooper explained chain of custody and legal requisition for footage when an allegation involves a minor. She used terms that management could not dismiss, such as evidentiary hold and preservation notice. Her voice shifted the room from a binary us versus them to a place where documents and timestamps mattered. The confrontation in the store now re-emerged in a new light as video was examined and statements were compared. What the footage actually showed was messy, and messy is crucial because messy resists neat accusations. The camera angles overlapped, and the register tape told a different story. A timestamp showed a transaction at 11:49, while the complaint had been made at 12:02. Another clip from Daniel Perez's phone showed June at the register with coins laid carefully on the counter and the cashier counting them. The audio overlay captured a faint exchange. "Where is the rest?" and then a tap like a coin sliding. Cross-referencing these pieces took time but offered clarity. In the hours that followed, Naomi Bennett and Lieutenant Cooper coordinated to ensure raw files were preserved and that the chain of custody was intact. Naomi sent a formal preservation notice to corporate and to store management. Lieutenant Cooper called a supervisor in the police department and asked for a review of the initial field report. The combination of legal pressure and an authoritative ally with tactical knowledge created an environment where the initial narrative could be challenged. One of the key moments of tension unfolded when the footage was first played for store staff in a meeting. The room smelled of coffee and older varnish. Chairs scraped. Faces were tight. Marcus watched on the small screen. For 5 minutes, no one spoke, and the only sounds were the click of the remote and an old clock ticking in the corner. Then Eric Martin said, "We will have to review further." Naomi said, "The footage contradicts your customer complaint." Eric said, "We asked the customer for a statement." Naomi said, "Statements do not substitute for evidence." Marcus said, "You will remove your report now." Eric said, "We cannot comment until corporate investigates." The tug between policy and accountability was palpable. This is a moment of sustained tension where memories and rules collided and where a family's dignity hung in the balance. A second moment of high tension occurred when the Police Oversight Board convened to consider opening an inquiry into the initial officer's conduct. Community members packed the room. Pastor Aaron spoke first, and his voice shook but held. He said, "We have to protect our children from being treated as suspects." Naomi presented the footage and an annotated timeline. Lieutenant Cooper explained procedure and how the officer's choice to handcuff a minor briefly, without clear probable cause, could violate both departmental protocol and youth protection guidelines. Officer Lee, who had been on the scene, defended his actions as following complaint protocols and protecting store property. Questions rose about bias and about whether the officer had sought corroborating evidence before using restraint. The audience heartbeat felt like a drum in the chest. People whispered prayer and support. That panel lasted over an hour, and the scrutiny was sharp enough to make even seasoned staff shift in their seats. 3 sensory images anchor the moment in the boardroom. The dry rasp of paper as Naomi slid exhibits across the table, the glare of fluorescent lights making everyone's foreheads shine, and the metallic scrape of a pen as someone signed an attendance sheet. In that meeting, the Oversight Board voted to open a formal review and to request full access to all footage and the initial officer report. That procedural decision meant the case moved from an informal complaint to a formal inquiry. At the same time, the story spilled into the public square. Carla Rodriguez, the journalist, published a report that included still frames from the video and interviews with both the family and the store manager. View counts rose. Social media became a pressure valve and then an amplifier. People posted side-by-side clips asking viewers to compare transaction timestamps and to notice the register beep. An online petition gathered thousands of signatures requesting the store apologize and that the officer face review. Naomi's legal letter demanded the company preserve the original video file and threatened litigation if the footage was altered or withheld. Those legal terms are precise and meaningful. When evidence is at stake, preservation notices serve as a formal warning and can trigger an obligation to retain data. In parallel, witnesses came forward. At least 8 people offered statements. Pastor Aaron Cole testified that he had watched the exchange and that the girl was at the register. Rosa Alvarez said she had seen the girl show coins to the cashier. Daniel Perez provided the phone video with the timestamp. Tamara, the original complainant, clarified that she had thought she saw suspicious behavior, but that upon reviewing the footage, she could not confirm anything. Eric Martin provided the internal incident report. Naomi Bennett cataloged each witness statement and placed them in a packet. Each named person added credibility and texture to the narrative. The community response was not merely comments, it was documentation. These witnesses were critical in shifting the public record. As the inquiry proceeded, certain institutional patterns emerged. Emails surfaced within store management indicating prior complaints that lacked follow-up. Naomi obtained an internal memo referencing an ongoing issue with loss prevention methods that relied heavily on customer complaints instead of cross-checking transaction logs. That memo suggested a systemic pattern of reliance on anecdote over evidence. Naomi highlighted the memo in her filings as showing pattern in practice and as a reason for further scrutiny. The revelation prompted corporate to issue a statement promising to review training and to reevaluate loss prevention policies. The City Oversight Board issued a letter calling for improved juvenile handling protocols for officers responding to merchant disputes. Legal and procedural descriptions now matter to explain what happens next. When a preservation notice is issued, corporate legal counsel typically has 24 to 72 hours to acknowledge receipt and to secure relevant files. Chain of custody requires the original file to be copied, hash-verified using a cryptographic checksum to ensure no alteration, and then stored with access logs noting who viewed or transferred the file. Investigators often produce a sequential log of file handling to preserve admissibility. Those steps are routine in evidence management, but are frequently overlooked in everyday disputes. Pressure produced consequences. The officer who had briefly handcuffed June was placed on administrative leave pending the oversight review. The store announced a temporary suspension of the manager on duty while corporate audited their incident reporting. Local civic groups set up a hotline and a small fund to help families dealing with similar confrontations. Naomi filed a formal complaint with the city and requested expedited access to footage and reports under the city's public safety transparency rules. Lieutenant Cooper met with the police chief informally and delivered a detailed account of procedural concerns, pointing out where department guidelines for handling minors and de-escalation had not been followed. The Oversight Board scheduled a public hearing that allowed community members to speak. The city recorder's office posted the hearing notice and set a timeline for the review. At the public hearing, supporters filled the chairs. People brought signs that read, "Protect our kids" and "Review the protocols." Marcus spoke with a voice that had softened with weeks of stress and an undercurrent of resolve. He said, "My daughter paid for the watch and nobody listened, and it made me feel like we had no dignity." Naomi presented a timeline and proposed policy changes, including mandatory verification of transaction logs before restraint of a minor, and a requirement for store staff to wait for managerial review. Lieutenant Cooper recommended revised training for officers responding to merchant disputes, and the incorporation of youth sensitivity modules. The city prosecutor attended and noted that, while criminal charges were unlikely based on the footage, she could support reforms in training and oversight. The result of that hearing was a public commitment to examine both corporate loss prevention protocols and police response tactics. 3 longer moments of tension appear in the record, and each forced decisions. The first was when the store resisted handing over footage and corporate threatened legal pushback. That 24-hour standoff felt like a test because video could be altered or overwritten if not immediately preserved. Naomi's letter referenced the preservation notice and included potential legal remedies. The second tense moment was at the oversight hearing when Officer Lee offered testimony that emphasized procedure and fear of being blamed. Facing community members who expected accountability is different than routine calls. The third came when the family considered civil litigation. It was a night of whispered consultations, of counting out possibilities, of weighing emotional costs against public good. Those nights are private and heavy. In the weeks that followed, consequences multiplied. The store updated its loss prevention training to require managers to confirm register transactions before calling police when a minor is involved. Corporate implemented a mandatory preservation policy for footage when an incident involves a minor, and promised to install signs notifying customers of recording retention procedures. The police department revised its juvenile encounter protocol to emphasize de-escalation and to limit the use of restraints unless there is clear and present danger. The officer was reassigned to administrative duties pending retraining, and the Oversight Board recommended additional community liaison positions. Some of the procedural updates are technical and worth noting. For example, the new retention policy establishes a minimum 30-day hold for footage in incidents involving allegations against minors, and requires server-level logs to show file integrity. The Oversight Board requested quarterly audits of compliance. Those changes are small on paper but protective in effect. They reduce the chance that crucial evidence will disappear, and they create a paper trail auditors can verify. The community action continued to grow. Volunteers organized workshops on how to request public records, how to preserve cell phone footage, and how to write a formal complaint. Rosa and Pastor Aaron led 2 sessions teaching neighbors their rights in merchant disputes. Naomi Bennett offered pro bono consultations to families in need, and the clinic she partnered with received donations that allowed counseling hours for children who had experienced public humiliation. A small fund was established in Keisha and Marcus' name to assist families with legal costs in similar cases. Attendance at the workshops grew, and soon the neighborhood center hosted a regular Know Your Rights clinic. 1 month after the incident, the immediate wounds had begun to heal, but the memory remained sharp. The family received a formal apology from corporate and a modest settlement that covered medical care for June's scraped knees and a community donation earmarked for youth programs. The officer's administrative leave became a mandated retraining program, and he wrote a reflection on how bias and haste had played a role in his actions. The store released a statement that acknowledged a mistake in not confirming the transaction sooner and announced training updates across the region. For June, the bruise on her wrist faded, but the story left marks in how she trusted spaces. She attended counseling offered through the Neighborhood Fund and learned techniques to manage the flashbacks triggered by public confrontations. The community reported a measurable uptick in reports of similar incidents in the weeks following the story, but also a greater willingness among witnesses to step forward and document what they saw. 3 months after the event, the Oversight Review concluded with formal recommendations. The city adopted clearer policies for police responses to merchant disputes and created a standing committee to review cases involving minors to ensure consistent application of the youth protection policy. The store chain instituted a mandatory manager verification step and installed more visible signage about video retention. Naomi helped draft a model policy that could be used by other retailers, and the document circulated among advocacy groups. A local high school invited Lieutenant Cooper to speak about public service and restraint, and she used the platform to teach de-escalation. The family reported a renewed sense of agency. Keisha joined the neighborhood committee and began to teach other parents how to preserve evidence and write complaints. The hotline numbers were printed on community flyers and put into neighborhood WhatsApp groups. 6 months after the incident, the changes had a wider ripple. The city recorded a 10% drop in reported merchant disputes that escalated to police intervention in minor cases as stores and officers implemented the new verification and de-escalation practices. The community fund had helped 5 families with legal or counseling support, and the Know Your Rights workshops had trained over 200 residents. Naomi's template policy was adopted by 3 other retail chains in the region. Lieutenant Cooper's community trainings grew into a larger program that partnered with the school district and local churches to offer youth safety curricula. June had re-engaged with school activities and joined a small after-school drama club where she channeled the awkwardness of the public scene into storytelling. She still sometimes flinched when a cart scraped behind her, but she was learning to tell her story on her own terms. The measurable outcomes were concrete. Corporate changed its policy on video retention and manager verification. The police department issued new guidance and mandated training hours for officers handling merchant disputes with minors. The Oversight Board instituted quarterly audits. The Neighborhood Center reported increased volunteerism and a higher rate of bystander documentation in similar events. Metrics showed the percentage of incidents resolved through managerial review rather than police restraint increased, and the number of complaints leading to administrative leave decreased when managers followed the new verification steps. Those numbers are not a cure, but they signal movement. This case is a lesson in how small actions add up. A child's receipt, a customer's phone video, a pastor's testimony, a neighbor's first aid, a lawyer's demand, and a lieutenant's presence combined to change protocols that affected thousands. The story shows how evidence and community pressure can produce accountability even when initial assumptions and bias push toward punishment.
It also demonstrates that institutional change requires sustained attention, legal expertise, and community organization. If this story moved you, there are things to do. Save receipts and cell phone footage. If you witness something, say, "I saw," and record basic details. Support local clinics and legal aid organizations that help families navigate these processes. Attend local oversight board meetings and push for clear policies on juvenile interactions. Share resources and teach neighbors how to preserve evidence and file complaints. At the end of the day, June's scraped knee healed and her confidence grew back slowly. The watch she had bought remained in the family for months and then was passed along to a neighbor's child as a small token of a community that would not let an injustice pass unnoticed. The public apology and the policy changes did not erase what happened, but they made it harder for that sequence to repeat unchecked. Dignity matters, and when a community decides to document and insist on evidence, the balance shifts. If you want
to follow similar stories, subscribe to this channel for more reporting on how ordinary people make institutions answer for their actions and how collective pressure can push toward real reform. Thank you for listening and for raising your voice when a neighbor needs it.